wake up in a locked room. You don't remember walking in. A stranger hands you a drink. You hesitate. You take it anyway. Hours pass, maybe more. Nothing makes sense. The walls feel wrong. The faces around you feel wronger. Someone asks you a question. You try to answer. The words won't come. Another question, then another. What happened to you? Who brought you here? And why does it feel like your own mind is slipping through your fingers? It sounds like fiction. It isn't. During the Cold War, the CIA ran secret experiments on the human mind, using drugs, isolation, and psychological manipulation to find out exactly how far a person could be broken before something inside them gave way. They gave the program the most boring name they could think of: MKUltra. For over 20 years, almost no one outside the agency knew it existed. Then, right as investigators started closing in, someone destroyed the evidence. Not lost, not misplaced, destroyed. So everything you're about to hear comes from what survived: leaked memos, Senate hearings, declassified files, and the accounts of people who lived through it. What was MKUltra really trying to build? How far did it actually go, and who paid the price? This is the story the US government tried to erase, and almost succeeded. It starts with one question: what if a human mind could be weaponized? Not with bullets, not with bombs, with chemicals, with fear, with psychology itself. In the early 1950s, American intelligence believed they were fighting a war on a battlefield no one could see, where the deadliest weapon wasn't a missile, it was the human brain. In 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles publicly warned the world about something he called Soviet brainwashing. Historians still debate whether that threat was ever real, but inside the CIA, it didn't matter. The fear was real enough. If another country found a way to control human behavior first, the US couldn't afford to be second, so the agency stopped asking if that was possible. They started asking how to build it themselves. On April 13, 1953, a program was approved in total secrecy, a name designed to mean nothing to anyone who saw it: MKUltra. On paper, research into memory, perception, and resistance to interrogation. In practice, permission to test the limits of the human mind on real people. Eventually, the program would branch into more than 140 documented sub-projects. The man running it wasn't a soldier, wasn't a spy in the way you'd imagine one. He was a chemist, Sidney Gottlieb. Almost no one outside the agency had heard his name. Inside the CIA, he became the architect of one of the most disturbing research programs in American history. His job wasn't to run experiments. It was to answer questions nobody had ever dared ask. Could a drug force someone to talk? Could memory be erased on command? Could a person's resistance simply dissolve? Nobody knew, and that uncertainty is exactly what kept the program growing. Instead of one hidden lab, the CIA built something far harder to trace: a web stretching across universities, hospitals, prisons, and military bases. Some of the researchers knew who was really funding them. Many didn't. According to later Senate investigations, the agency routinely used front organizations to hide its fingerprints completely. A program with this much reach, operating in plain sight, and almost no one saw it coming. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A new drug, colorless, odorless, active in doses smaller than a grain of salt, LSD. Sometimes it triggered euphoria, sometimes terror. Sometimes it seemed to unravel a person's grip on reality itself. To the CIA, that unpredictability wasn't a warning sign. It was an opportunity. Could it become a truth serum? A way to confuse an enemy agent? A shortcut past a person's will to resist? At first, test subjects volunteered, but as the project expanded, that stopped being a requirement. Some people were given LSD with no idea they'd taken anything at all. And that single fact, the disappearance of consent, is where this story turns from classified research into human experimentation. Students, hospital patients, prison inmates, military personnel, ordinary people who simply happened to be standing in the wrong room. But that was just the beginning. Some of what happened next took place inside hospitals, some inside prisons in exchange for money or reduced sentences, some inside military testing rooms. The methods changed from site to site, so did the goals. MKUltra was never one experiment. It was dozens, running in parallel, under a single classified name, which is exactly why historians are still piecing it together today. And then came the chapter that would define the entire program in the public imagination: The CIA rented apartments in San Francisco and New York. They called them safe houses. The project had a name, Operation Midnight Climax. According to declassified records, the CIA paid sex workers to bring men back to these apartments, men with no idea what they were walking into. Some were secretly dosed with LSD. Behind one-way mirrors, agency personnel watched. The goal officially was to observe how the drug behaved in ordinary, real-world conditions rather than a sterile lab. This is where things get interesting, because for all the secrecy, all the funding, all the years of testing, the program never delivered what it was built to find. No confirmed method to control a mind, no reliable truth serum, just years of inconsistent results and a mounting pile of ethical violations no one back home would ever see. But somewhere in that pile was one case that would eventually bring the whole program into the light. They didn't know what was coming. In November 1953, an Army scientist named Frank Olson attended a CIA retreat. Without his knowledge, LSD was slipped into his drink. In the days that followed, something in him broke. Severe psychological distress, paranoia, a man who no longer recognized his own mind. 9 days later, Frank Olson fell from the window of a New York hotel room. He died instantly. His family was told it was suicide. For more than 20 years, that was the official story. Then, in the 1970s, the truth surfaced. Frank Olson had been drugged without his consent days before his death. The exact circumstances of what happened in that hotel room are still debated. But the fact that he was secretly dosed is not in question. It's documented. Frank Olson wasn't an isolated case. By the time MKUltra quietly wound down, hundreds of people had passed through CIA-funded studies. Some knew, many didn't. And because record-keeping was inconsistent from the start, historians can only ever reconstruct part of the full picture. That missing history was about to get a lot harder to recover. Because just as questions started circling closer to the truth, someone inside the CIA made a decision that would try to erase it permanently. By the early 1970s, the Cold War was shifting, and inside the CIA, there was rising anxiety about what old buried programs might reveal if they ever came to light. In 1973, that anxiety turned into action. CIA Director Richard Helms gave the order: destroy the MKUltra files. Thousands of documents were fed into shredders. 2 decades of reports, correspondence, internal memos, gone in a matter of days. No one knows exactly how much was lost. What we do know is this: because those files no longer exist, parts of MKUltra's true scope will never be reconstructed. If that had been the end of it, you would never have heard the name MKUltra. But history had one twist left. Not everything burned. Years earlier, a set of financial records had been filed away separately from the rest. Overlooked or simply forgotten, they survived. At first, they looked like nothing. Budgets, invoices, routine funding requests. But investigators studying them realized these weren't ordinary numbers. They were the fingerprints of a program that had run, hidden, for more than 2 decades. In 1975, the Church Committee launched a sweeping investigation into U.S. intelligence abuses. The Rockefeller Commission followed close behind, examining the CIA's activities on American soil. What they confirmed stunned the country. The CIA had run secret drug experiments, including cases where people were dosed with LSD without ever agreeing to it. For most Americans, this was the first time they'd ever heard the name MKUltra, and the system had made one fatal mistake. It assumed the paper trail was gone. It wasn't. Not all of it. In 1977, the Senate convened public hearings dedicated entirely to MKUltra. Witnesses testified under oath. Surviving records were laid out for the world to see. Officials finally acknowledged what the agency had spent 2 decades denying: a sprawling, federally funded program built to manipulate human behavior. But the hearings revealed something else: a frustrating, permanent gap. So much evidence had already turned to ash that investigators were trying to solve a puzzle, missing most of its pieces. Not because no one asked the right questions, because the answers no longer existed. For the people who had unknowingly become subjects, this recognition came decades too late. Some only learned as adults that they'd been drugged without their knowledge as students, patients, or soldiers. Families searched for answers that no longer had documents to back them up. Some went to court. Some simply wanted the government to say out loud that it had happened. In several cases, the U.S. government reached settlements, but no settlement could hand back the years of confusion, fear, or unanswered questions those people carried. So, did it work? Did the CIA ever find a way to control a human mind? No. Despite 2 decades, 140-plus subprojects, and untold amounts of money, there is no evidence MKUltra ever achieved reliable mind control. Just fear, disrupted lives, and a program that chased something that may never have been possible. What MKUltra actually left behind is something else entirely. A warning. A case study in what happens when secrecy is allowed to outrun accountability. When fear is allowed to override ethics. When national security becomes the excuse for stripping away a person's right to know what's being done to their own mind. Its legacy still shapes the rules protecting human research subjects today. Informed consent, independent oversight, the basic idea that no institution, however powerful, gets to experiment on people without their knowledge. The CIA eventually admitted MKUltra was real, but admission isn't the same as the full truth. Some chapters were shredded in 1973 and are gone forever. Others were never written down to begin with, and that's the part that should unsettle you the most. Not that a program like this existed, not even that it happened in secret, but that history, real, documented, lived history, can be rewritten simply by deciding what gets fed into a shredder.
Reality has more stories to tell. We'll uncover the next one. Subscribe to Rivet, because the next true story might sound even more impossible.